Given that Berserk is now having a hiatus yet again, which is at this point expected to be part of the experience, it made me ponder as to why I can still forgive Berserk, even though thinking about Berserk only makes the yearning for a conclusion, or at the very least a continuation, all the more painful. When looking through the various positive aspects of Berserk, it's quite clear that for many, Berserk is seen as a manga or anime that handles the complexity of relationships or the absurdity of the religious dogma, while being in a world where such religious mysticism is the natural order. However, for others, they are feared for its artistic beauty, which once more shows that the seinen manga is better than any shonen manga will ever be. Regardless of one's admiration of Berserk, for me there was some doubt as to why I've taken such liking to specifically Berserk, even though at times it might feel as if the golden arc couldn't be more dull and drawn out. While Berserk may have some minor edges that you will stumble upon whenever it be on a boat or within a tree, it always managed to drag you right back in. But the question is exactly what is it that makes us coming back? Is it due to the fact that its brutal depiction of humanity battling against monstrosity itself? It certainly was what first made me wanting to read through the entire manga, wondering just how deep the rabbit hole would go. But there are other manga out there which depicts both the violence and its monsters as brutal and horrendous as Berserk does. And although I could continue to reiterate endlessly over Berserk having multiple excellent traits, but yet it wouldn't really highlight as to why it's able to captivate so many people, and of course it would be pretty redundant. Instead, I realized what was so captivating about Berserk, some specific traits that are quite obscure, yet is the fundamental element of Berserk. Of course, these are merely observations, and as such this will be different for each individual. Nonetheless, hopefully this will be informative for you. At first glance, when reading Berserk, you may assume that it follows a similar story to that of a typical shonen, in that the main character sets out on a journey to beat the strongest opponent they can find. But to assume that would be completely nullifying the point of the Elves of the Misty Valley chapters, or even the Conviction arc as a whole. This is due to the fact that it's also focused on portraying the struggles that Guts is facing, and as such, what starts off as a mere revenge turns into an inner struggle between Guts' inner beast, making up the fire within him from the smoldering remains of Guts' emotions. It is this struggle that causes doubt and uncertainty to dwell not only within Guts, but also within the reader. The reason for this is due to how this simple emotion of vengeance slowly starts to manifest itself as the driving force of Guts, shaping him and mocking him when he doesn't rely upon this emotion, which in turn causes him to cast doubt over this path, whenever or not this path truly justifies the means, since this path he will not only sacrifice himself, but those few he holds dear. This complexity of struggle within yourself is similar to that of the ancient Greek epic poems. Such is the case with the Iliad, whereupon Achilles' rage is what fuels both his brilliance, but also his downfall, since it is through rage he neglects his only weak spot, the Achilles heel. And with the epic of Odysseus, we get to read of a hero whose action rival only that of Guts in terms of ingenuity and cunningness. There's also the case of the god hand intervening in mysterious ways, similar to that of the Olympian gods, and they both more or less manipulating the mortal world merely due to emotionally driven reasons, since this after all is what the god hand's actions comes down to. Their will is ultimately the will of the idea of evil, whereupon the gods of the Olympian merely does it as a way of entertainment for them to settle old quarrels between each other. Of course, technically almost all work that has been done can be attributed to the work of the ancient Greek, or rather we can see similarities between the two. However, Berserk's adventures managed to edge out almost any other manga out there in terms of its epicness, and as such, that's why it holds such familiarity to epic poems and in certain other poems such as Oedipus. However, Berserk also has pinned down the concept of the underdog to the extreme, while at the same time carefully crafting our main protagonist to still maintain a power to be reckoned with. That said, simply having a protagonist being an underdog isn't enough to really ensure that the reader will feel compelled to root for the protagonist, but instead in Berserk's case, it's how it managed to take advantage of the brutal reality with its dark undertone and apply this to our main character, since not even Guts can escape the crushing reality of both pain and suffering when he gets to see the world for how it really is. The prime example of this is Guts wielding the Berserker armor. This grants Guts the needed strength to not only allow Guts to destroy once feared apostles in a single swing, which unrelated to the topic of power, is an indication that we will see Guts fighting elite apostles to other monstrosities with much more power than the apostles we have seen so far in the manga, which would mean we've moved past the beginner stage of Berserk. However, with this strength comes a great burden, although it isn't fully clear what exactly the mysterious awe that is enchanted within the armor is truly capable of doing. What we do know is that the wearer of the armor will slowly lose their own sanity due to the armor's ability to temporarily numb the wearer's fear and feeling of any pain by taking their innermost dreadful persona and amplifying it to the point where the wearer will blindly attack anything. This, coupled with its story-rich aspect and its brutal depiction of a medieval fantasy world, causes uncertainty of not only whenever or not your favorite character will survive or not, but whenever or not they will be themselves after the journey is over, since in this world nothing is sacred, and anything that claim to be shall be desecrated. In essence, it is taking the good part of a typical shonen manga structure of adventure, where you get to experience someone getting stronger as they go along, only that in Berserk, for Guts is all about him being able to master his cunningness and strategy, rather than some physical development, and since any physical improvement for Guts would require him to sacrifice something more than merely himself. Previous reasons stated before, which is the balance between its depiction of its surreal and realistic world. What many manga struggle to attain is a sense of mythological yet realistic depiction of something inhuman, something that breaks the normality yet is able to establish itself within nature. In essence, they fail to create a believable or suitable folklore, or rather a fantasy world. To showcase some examples of what I mean is that there are various art pieces and even an art movement that is dedicated to accomplishing this. The movement was the Romantic Nationalism movement. This movement, as the name implies, was dedicated to the nationalistic revolution that was going on at the time. However, in doing so, artists had to scrape through not only various important events, but also one's culture, and among was folklore. Some artists who managed to capture this beautifully is John Bauer with Root Trolls and the Princess Tuvstar, American Progress by John Gust, and then there's also Caesar by Adolphe Yvonne. Now the last two aren't meant to be taken as literal, but as symbolic. But nonetheless, it creates an environment that feels believable. This is where Berserk really shines. There's a very good reason as to why almost every panel of Berserk is a masterpiece by itself, which is that it's able to portray a believable yet surreal world with creatures that is out of this world, which truly helps to create a surreal setting when it's needed. This in contrast to, for example, a rather good manga, Ibel Blatt, where it has similar momentum of slowly bringing out its fantasy world to Berserk, since once it's introduced it feels much less polished, almost artificial, because it simply hasn't gotten the time to firmly establish itself, and as such any impact the surreal parts would have is quickly diminished. In short, it's used more as a tool rather than being an essential part of the manga. Looking past Berserk, Dorohedoro managed to accomplish the same result to what Berserk is able to do, to give the surreal part of the manga the time it needs to establish itself, make the reader feel comfortable with it, but also leave out areas deliberately to surprise the reader once more. And while Miura has taken inspiration from artists such as Hieronymus Bosch in its surreal depiction of monstrosities and the chaos it brings, you could argue that some of the monsters in Berserk stems from Hieronymus' work and A Vision of the Last Judgment by William Blake. By its symbolic meaning of how Berserk depicts the God Hand and in particular Griffith, and of course the similarity of the art to the Eclipse. Miura managed to create a world that is both reminiscent of said art and the period it was created based on, but also something completely unique. Thus it makes the reader able to both see a fantasy world they are accustomed to, but also at the same time a world that is completely alien to them, almost as if they were with Gus to experience what he is experiencing. That is also what the eclipse symbolizes, the destruction of the old world, or rather the coming of a new age. A dark age which will tear apart the very foundation of the world. And a quick side note, there's also the art of Relativity by M.C. Escher, which I didn't feel plays a large role in influencing Berserk, as the previous art does, except for chaos and being arbitrary. In the end, the point is simply that Berserk managed to surpass both the historical and fantasy world Berserk is based upon, and instead it creates its own lore which outshines any pre-existing one. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, see you all in the next video.